The Secrets of Stargate is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give.
You're listening to The Secrets of Stargate.
General West, Jackson has identified the seventh symbol.
All right, here we go. We are about to try to make a connection.
All we gotta do is bust out of here, commandeer the ship, and fly on home.
Indeed. You say that a lot.
I know that this could be dangerous. But this is our job, right? It's what we signed on to do.
It was never about going home. It's about getting us to where we're going.
Hi, I'm Jack Barazzini, and you're listening to The Secrets of Stargate, where we talk about the hidden meanings and deeper layers found in the Stargate movies, TV series, and more. Joining me today are Father Cory Stika. Hi, Father.
How's it going, Jack?
It's going well. And Lisa Jones. Hi, Lisa.
Hey, Jack.
And Victor Lambs. Hey, Victor.
Hi, Jack.
Today we are discussing the second episode of the first season of Stargate SG-1, The Enemy Within. This episode picks up pretty much right after the end of the previous episode, which was the series premiere. And we start with, they've got the iris closed, and every so often the Goa'uld are smashing up against it, trying to get through. And that scene really reminded me, we can talk about this more in a minute, but it kind of reminded me of that episode of Battlestar Galactica 33, where every 33 minutes they're having to jump to get away from the Cylons. It had that same kind of feel. As we're moving through the episode, Kowalski's been having a really bad headache, and Teal'c is there, and he is been imprisoned by General Hammond. Jack O'Neill is trying to convince the general to trust Teal'c and to let him join the SG-1 team. And Hammond does not seem to be against that, but General Kennedy, or Colonel Kennedy from the Pentagon, is coming, and he is tasked with basically questioning Teal'c and taking him back for questioning and potential experimentation. And Kowalski, they end up discovering that he has a infant Goa'uld inside him. It takes him over. He ends up killing several of the doctors and trying to escape. Teal'c allows them to use the Goa'uld that is inside him to perform experiments with anesthesia, where they attempt to remove the Goa'uld from Kowalski. The surgery appears to be successful. They take it out of him, but then it ends up that the Goa'uld has taken over his brain with, I guess, just its head left. He tries to escape. There's an altercation between him and Teal'c. The back of his head ends up getting sliced off by the closing of the Stargate. And that's the end of Kowalski, unfortunately. And when all this happens, they recognize Teal'c's loyalty, and the president ends up calling Hammond and giving Kennedy a dressing down over the phone. And the episode ends with Teal'c on the SG-1 team as they leave for their first mission.
You're absolutely right. You mentioned about the BSG episode, and you know, not ironically, but interestingly, of course, that 33 was the first episode after the pilot of BSG. Now, mind you, BSG was many years after this. I mean, this was 5 years, I think, or something like that, when BSG started. And I think the two are it's coincidental. This idea of having the race against time, the race against an enemy that's constantly at the gates, that's an old theme in fiction, especially. So
yeah, definitely. I really liked how, I know we talked about this last week, we were comparing the Children of the Gods to Encounter at Farpoint, which is the first season or first episode of Next Generation. I like how put together the show already feels. Like going into this, it does not feel like they're getting their footing. People feel like they have their characters already under their belt, and everything feels natural.
That is a big difference between Stargate and Star Trek. Is really Stargate, they do a good job of getting into their characters quickly. Star Trek, not so much.
And that was a main consideration when they were casting too, is they knew they were going to have a 44 episode pickup right out of the gate. And so they didn't have a chance to go through the pilot process where, you know, you do a pilot, test audience to say, well, I don't like that guy. So you do some cast changes and film it again. They didn't have a chance to do that. So they needed to nail the cast right out the gate. And to their credit, they certainly did.
Right.
I felt like this episode really, I mean, the first one, you got the sense of who they were, but this one, when you watch the rest of the series, this one, they've settled in. They are kind of who they are for the next several seasons. So it was, I wrote down on my list that, Carter's spouting technical lingo, it's just natural words, she falls into that very quickly.
And General Hammond, in the first episode, he's very brusque. He's very rough. This one, you start to see his personality start to come out. You get to see his protectiveness of his troops. I mean, he basically tells Colonel Kennedy, he literally tells, excuse me, not basically, he does tell Colonel Kennedy, there's the door. Don't let it hit you where the good Lord split you.
And he calls a lot of them son, if you notice. Yeah,
this is the kind of the first glimpse we have of General Hammond's personal integrity, as well as Colonel O'Neill's personal integrity. And that, I think, is the real heart of the show. Not just those two characters, but other characters as well. They have a personal integrity that they live by. You want to spend time with them because they are authentically who they are. And I think that's one of the reasons the show has been so successful.
I really like the scene where they're interrogating Teal and how they're standing up for him, which I found that interesting because you understand where Jack O'Neill is coming from, wanting to have him on the team and trusting him implicitly because he risked his life to save them. But you also understand where the higher ups would be coming from. You've got this guy who is an alien from another planet. You're not going to immediately want to start trusting him.
Well, and as they even say in the show, an alien from another planet containing the larval state of their enemies and having been a fighter. And we find out how important of a figure he was within the Jaffa later, at one of the lead fighters of their enemy. And all of a sudden now he's turned tail.
Right.
One question about that scene. How did O'Neill know that Teal'c has an apostrophe in it?
That is a good question. Yeah.
I'm sure they had to fill out forms, right, when he arrived.
Probably, yeah.
It's on his passport.
There's a photo I'd like to see.
It's interesting because Teal'c is completely understanding of why they would be suspicious, and Jack O'Neill comes in and he's like, I guess we're not living up to your expectations, and he's pretty much just like, this is kind of what I expected.
It makes sense, though, just because, even in the real world, if someone betrays their country, comes to the United States, as even like you hear about the Russian spies back in the Cold War, they weren't immediately just released off into the general public, say, enjoy your life as an American. They were treated with suspicion until they proved themselves that worthy of being allowed to be in America.
Because the best way to infiltrate someone would just say, hey, I'm coming over your team. Just let me do whatever I want. You got to earn that trust, which they go through that with him basically risking his life again to allow them to experiment on him with the anesthetic to get the Goa'uld out of Kowalski. And in this episode, we also get a lot more of the background of the Goa'uld fleshed out, like with the genetic memory that they have. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, a lot of firsts in this episode. First mention of the Goa'uld genetic memory, first use of the word Tauri, and first use of the red phone where General Hammond threatens to and calls the President of the United States, and he'll get a lot of use out of that.
Yes.
Out of that red phone.
Nice.
Nice.
I think this was the first use when they used the word mount and dialing, that they were dialing a planet.
And then they have the word dial home device written on the whiteboard behind Sam Carter.
I love that whiteboard. It's just so perfect.
It's exactly how those things usually end up going. Like, you have this high-tech facility and you still need your whiteboard.
Hey, I still take all my notes on paper so I can understand. I still the old-fashioned way. Mentioned the Tauri, and they did make it more explicit that, and it sets it up, of course, for the rest of the series, that all these humans that they're meeting are from Earth originally, that their ancestors came from Earth to populate these different planets.
Right. It also gives a much better reason for why everyone out in the galaxy is basically just humans with bumpy foreheads than Star Trek.
Yeah.
Because I know they have an explanation for that in Star Trek, where it's some ancient species seeded DNA throughout the universe, but it wasn't actual humanoids at that point. So they definitely get out in front of that and just say, hey, this is why they're all evolved humans or just regular humans.
And I did like Teal'c's look when he's talking about, there's this ancient story of this Tauri and all this stuff. Like, Teal'c, that's us.
So should we talk about Kowalski here? He is such a great character. And, the more watching this episode again, I just realized how it was implicit, but almost explicit, the linkage between, the original Stargate movie, the show, and especially the character of Charlie Kowalski is to those old 1950s and 1960s World War II squad movies, where you would have a squad of 5 or 6 people, the sergeant, and then, the enlisted men trying to cross, France or whatever, while the Germans are shooting at them. And, there's always a Polish character named, Kowalski or Kolotsky or something. There was always like an Italian American, so we have Ferretti, and somewhere along the way they're talking about their girls back home, and one of them takes a bullet, and it's usually Kowalski, or Charlie takes a bullet, and as he's dying, he says, don't let them get me, don't let me get me. And it's like, no, son, you'll pull through, you'll be okay, son. And I'm watching this, and it's very played very well, so it's not tongue in cheek, but there's definitely as I think the creators of the show were growing up like a lot of us watching the Saturday morning movies, and on UHF it was always these either monster movies or these 1950s 1960s squad movies. So there's a lot of that in Charlie Kowalski too.
Well, he was going to have his first command. He was so excited he was going to finally get his first command, and just like he was the one with the picture of the girlfriend, showing, oh, this is my girlfriend, I can't wait to get home and marry her. Never mind,
that character's not long for this world whenever that happens.
I think that's what's interesting in this episode, if you think about it, that Kowalski's one of the few original characters, right, from the movie. And they'd kind of set him up that he's going to get SG-2, he's going to be a big deal, in the pilot. And then right out of the gate, he's dead. So it is interesting that they did that. And I mean, the speculation would be so that just to prove how bad or how serious the threat is from the Goa'uld, right, that even a main character could die. So everybody better be on their toes.
Right. This is pre-Game of Thrones, so they would just kill main characters willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't happen too much in the late 90s.
Although I had forgotten how Kowalski died. I had forgotten the method by which they ended up killing him. And it's just like, oh, that's quite the lobotomy.
Odd choice,
just
though, right?
Beam the top of his head off to, we were saying Chulak earlier, we were talking before.
Weird day for the people of Chulak. The gate opens and closes, and
I have to say, watching it again, when O'Neill says, hold him right there, and I'm thinking, really?
Yeah.
You can't just shoot him? I mean, I'm kind of like, that's an odd choice.
O'Neill is,
I don't know.
O'Neill is very, a lot more acerbic and cynical than he will become. They're like when, there's the impacts on the iris. It's like bugs on a windshield. He eventually finds his sense of humor, I guess. Well, a different sense of humor, I suppose. Yeah.
He's got.
Yeah.
That was speaking of the hitting on the iris, that was an interesting effect where you'd see it flex. Yeah. But and then they did tie into the movie, where extended version of the movie, where they had the crushed warriors. Well, we know them now, Jaffa they're called, but the crushed raw soldiers in the rock, and they tied into that how people they would come in, and the warriors would come in and hit that iris instead of hitting rock.
I do wonder if they need to ever scrape off the back of that thing. Like, how close to the event horizon is it?
Didn't you say 3 microns?
Yep.
Well, there you go.
See, that's one of those things they talk about too, is like, we know the iris is close, but we don't know how close. They say it's 3 microns. If you think about that, that's literally infinitesimal.
So close that the matter doesn't even reintegrate. It hits the iris as energy, I guess. And it's pretty impervious to everything except extreme gravity. Extreme gravity
and too much energy will eventually start to affect it. And there's an episode about that later.
Yes, so core. Yeah, this is a very dark episode, and I mean that literally. It's early on in the series, they do not light the SGC to the extent that they do later on, where it seems bright. And I think it's very authentic. It feels very lived in, like it is an underground base, and they have just the amount of lighting that you would need down there, but it does make it hard to watch.
I noticed that too. I was thinking maybe it was my TV, or maybe it was just early, just the way it looked early on, and I'd forgotten. But I guess it was done intentionally.
Yeah, that's the funny part, is I had kind of the same thoughts. I'd taken all my DVDs and ripped them to my media server, and I thought, did I not do that well? Did I do something to cause the image to be dark? And again, it's one of those things that kind of makes sense, because this went from being a more or less decommissioned installation to now we're an active mission. Well, maybe not everything's quite set up right yet. Completely.
And that's usually how it goes on military bases.
Yeah.
The lights aren't going to work and everything's going to have lead paint.
Oh, yeah. Oh, believe me, I've been in buildings that are like that.
Yeah, I do like the film grain. Just they were still using film at this point, so it does have that gritty 1980s action movie type film quality to it before they went to video.
I do like how this episode is essentially a part 3 of the series opener, though, which this was still at the time, like television was starting to transition with Babylon 5 and Deep Space Nine from pure episodic television to longer stories. But this really feels like you get an integrated story, which I like a lot.
It is kind of funny to think about what was airing at the same time this was. And yes, this was season 3, I want to say, of DS9 was airing at about the same time. because I think it was 91 is when DS9 first started, so it was very concurrent to when DS9 was starting to do the more serialized storyline, because the first couple of seasons of DS9 are still pretty episodic, as all of it is, but they brought in more of the serial line after about season 3 or so. TV is starting to explore that idea. Of course, Babylon 5 is kind of the watershed, at least in science fiction, for serialized TV.
Yep.
I mean, it really is the one that everybody points to of that, where this was much more revolutionary as far as that's concerned. But they'd been playing with it, as you see with this, long before that.
Another show that premiered the same year that was playing around with the longer story arcs was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which had every season was basically its own arc, but still had Monsters of the Week episodes as well.
Another thing they touch on in this episode is Daniel Jackson's anxiety over what's happening with Skara and Shuri. And they go into that because Kowalski, at the end of the episode, even though they've removed most of the Goa'uld from his brain, it still is able to take him over. So that's it seems like that's going to be a big lingering question over the season is what has happened to them and can they be saved?
And then also when they say, does something of the host survive? The fact that Kowalski being taken over was still able to dial or set off the auto destruct, right? So how did the Goa'uld know what was in Kowalski's brain? That looked like it gave Daniel Jackson and Carter a little bit of hope there that there's something left.
We get Dr. Warner in this episode. And I think a couple other ones as well. I meant to look up the actor's name. I didn't, but he's someone from X-Files, every TV show of the 90s he was on whenever they would need somebody just to play the normal doctor or the normal scientist, but yet with a distinctive enough face that he would stand out. And he's very good. He's a very good doctor. He approaches things, medically, and I like him. I like how, and this may change later on, but so far it seems like they keep the scientific jargon believable and to a minimum. That sometimes when you get into science fiction shows, they can go over the top with the technobabble and it's just gibberish. But it seems like here they're trying to relate it to actual concepts and keep it at least semi-believable.
I think they do a really good job of that. They use O'Neill's character to kind of, remember in the beginning he said he didn't like scientists. So whenever you see Carter go off into her technobabble, he usually is rolling his eyes or making a face or some, quip to get her to be quiet, or, they kind of shut it down. So no, there's not a lot. And that is nice. It's more of it's science fiction without all of trying to teach you technology.
Or worse yet, getting the technology wrong.
Well,
yeah.
And O'Neill really, he kind of is that audience stand-in where scientific concepts can be dumbed down and explained to him, but it doesn't feel like, a lot of times there'll be movies or series where they're explaining the science for the sake of the audience, but everyone in the room is an expert, so it seems extremely, it's like, why are you telling people these basic scientific concepts?
Yeah, Star Trek doesn't do that. So, of course, as you know, as the chief of engineering, this is how the warp drive works.
What kind of force field is it? Yeah. Some kind of force.
Speaking of technology, did you love the part where Teal'c explains that the Jaffa don't understand any of the technology? He called it magic, right? And so that he doesn't understand it and doesn't know how to use it. And of course, I loved the Colonel's face with kind of like, then what good are you if you can't explain it to us?
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot, because that's another thing that you could compare it to Star Trek, where everyone is an expert at everything whenever the plot calls for it.
I've never seen this race before, but I know exactly how their warp drive works, including which buttons to push on a panel that I can't actually read.
At least when Stargate does that later on, it's like, oh, I've studied all the schematics, and so I know exactly where we are in the Goa'uld mothership and how to get to the Peltac and stuff. But yeah, this episode does give us the next in a long line of slimy, antagonistic colonels that visit Stargate Command. Some are, have more ill intent than others. And I was watching it, and yeah, he is slimy. He does have some good points, though. About maybe keeping Kowalski around as a Goa'uld. As well. The one thing I did notice, because I was wondering if he came back on the show, and I learned that the actor who played Colonel Kennedy, Alan Rakins, he was just before this in a sci-fi movie called Terminal Voyage, which has a second title, and that second title is Star Quest. So you can kind of see how everything is connected here. Here we are on Star Quest, talking about Stargate with an actor who was on Star Quest. But that's a bit of a reach.
Well, yeah, he also plays the slimy character well, because if you remember the TV series from the 80s, L.A. Law, he was kind of like one of the head lawyers on that. So If I remember right, he was like one of the real jerk lawyers too.
He's
so
typecast.
yeah, he plays that character well.
I was reading something today about this episode, and the person, and I wish I could give their website a shout out. They probably wrote this in 1997, so it doesn't really matter. And they pointed out that this episode really kind of introduced a second villain or antagonist for the Stargate, for SG-1 or Stargate Command, and that was the government. And throughout the entire series, the government is another villain or antagonist that it runs through. And I hadn't really thought of it that way. So I thought that was pretty insightful, that we not only keep getting these slimy colonels and senators and, stuff later on. It's there's always some government agency, somebody sent from somewhere to shut them down or to question them, or,
Yep. I do wonder how they had to walk that line, being that the show uses the Air Force extensively. And I know they had to get approval for the scripts. Like with pretty much anything that uses the actual branches of the military, you have to get that signed off on. So I wonder how much they had to walk that line with how bad can we make the government.
Well, and eventually if it stops being so much the military itself. I mean, you still get occasional characters, but then eventually it becomes the politicians. And of course, the military has no problem ripping on politicians unofficially. And I honestly wonder, at least this early on, how much military involvement there was. I mean, later on, you actually get like the chief of staff of the Air Force actually playing a role in a command ceremony.
Yeah, 2 chiefs of staff, actually. Nice. Yeah.
2 of them.
2.
Yeah.
Yep. I think I remember watching one of them going, hey, he was chief of staff when I was in the Air Force. Yeah. I remember him. He changed our uniforms. I didn't like that. No.
I think people in the military also tend to be fans of shows like this anyway, so they probably had a large following.
I did read somewhere that they did that they in the Air Force in fact they said at Cheyenne Mountain there's an actual door that says like SGC on it. It's a fake door, I think.
Yeah, it's a broom closet, but it says to Stargate Command or something like that.
And my older brother used to live in Colorado Springs, so whenever I went out there, we would talk about going into Cheyenne Mountain to see the Stargate.
Yeah, they don't let you get down to that level.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see how they explore the way the Goa'uld take over their hosts, because of course I've not seen the rest of the series yet, so I'm interested in that aspect. I'm also interested in how the Goa'uld reproduce, because it doesn't seem like they would have children. But
do you
big
hit that?
vats of Goa'uld juice.
Much later. Yeah. Well, there were a few inconsistencies, but it gives spoilers for later. So I don't know if we want to talk about that.
Yeah. And this one, it was like, we didn't see it. We didn't see the Goa'uld was left in his head because it had been absorbed so completely. And then at the end, there's a little Goa'uld head that pops out. Yeah, Goa'uld nugget. Yeah. Chicken McGould or whatever. they kind of walk that back a little bit, and I think the Goa'uld remains more distinct, wrapped around the spinal column there. But I did appreciate how, in order to save money, whenever they were showing the surgery rather than actually like showing like a full CGI Goa'uld or something, they had their little X-ray view, which was the wireframe flat shaded animation. Yeah.
3D model.
That was good. It was good. Yeah, there's certain things in this episode I felt like that were a little fast forwarded, but they had so much really plot they had to get through to move it along to get us to where we could do Planet of the Week or kind of set everything up, that it's forgivable because it gave you those good emotional, see the real emotional connections, the loyalty. You learn a lot about O'Neill and how loyal he is to people, stuff like that. So I'll forgive him the kind of, it's a lot in one episode.
It does seem like it was very economically written. Like they did not waste any time in this episode, which I really appreciate, because if this was made now, the entire subplot with Teal'c being under suspicion and being investigated would have been stretched out to be 5 or 6 episodes of high drama.
Yes.
And just over, like, I'm just thinking of like later Battlestar Galactica or Star Trek Discovery, where everything has to be very high drama all the time.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I got over very quickly, right? But you had to send them off world. I mean, you had to have SG-1 in place. So let's go.
Yeah, Stargate has always been very good about right out of the gate, what the show's going to be about. They set up, the point of the show. They're very economical with their story beats, and I like that for that.
Yeah, so after poor Kowalski's gone, they get all suited up and they jump through the Stargate.
And you notice they go to the world that he was going to go to.
Yep.
No, I didn't notice.
Yeah.
Just step over his corpse and off they go.
I wonder if O'Neill got his stereo.
Yeah, he must have had a pretty good stereo.
Yeah.
And we learned how effective Teal'c is going to be in a fight, right? Because with him going head to head with Kowalski strangles him basically and then takes off, and then he gets up and chases him down and is able to hold him in place, overpower him, all that. So that was a good, because we learned a lot about Jaffa and their strength and how old they are and all that kind of stuff. So this was a nice kind of setup for the what role he's going to play.
Yeah, they did hint in the Children of the Gods that Jaffa get an advantage from having the larva of the Goa'uld, but he really didn't get into that very much. But we got to see that there, where he's able to fight Goa'uld-influenced human on an equal plane. You know, and so
we also learned something critically important about the Goa'uld in this episode too, which is Kowalski Goa'uld could have gotten away scot-free if he hadn't called Teal'c to the medical lab just to gloat or call him a traitor or rub it in. You know, he could have just gotten up, head out, but no, he had to call Teal'c a Chauvin or whatever, and because of that, he's not with us anymore.
He outed himself.
It seems like there's definitely a pattern of all the Goa'ulds being maniacal to the point of sabotaging their own plans.
Yep, pretty much.
Very arch.
and that's part of the genetic makeup, the genetic memory of the Goa'uld is, here's how you react. You act like you are the king of the world and everybody else must bow before you, even if you're not.
I did like I liked Teal'c's Gandalf moment.
Yes.
You shall not pass.
Yep.
You turn stone elf.
Well, we also learned about the Goa'uld trickery, right?
Yeah.
That he could, he was there, the Goa'uld was, and Kowalski, and pretending, and, I just need to speak to my friend. It's okay. So in that, we see a lot of that later, too. You're not sure if you're talking to the real person or not.
All right. Well, I think that'll probably wrap it up for tonight. But before we go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create Secrets of Stargate, including David J., Chris E., James S., Jonathan H., and Ryan Z. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Stargate and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Be sure to follow the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or on the SQPN YouTube channel. To find previous episodes of Secrets of Stargate and to send feedback, please visit sqpn.com/Stargate. You can email us at stargate@sqpn.com or follow StarQuest on social media at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia or on Twitter at SQPN. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the next episode of SG-1, Emancipation. Until then, Father Cory, thank you for joining me and sharing the Secrets of Stargate.
Thank you, Jack.
Lisa Jones, thank you too.
Oh, thank you, Jack.
And Victor Lambs, thanks.
Thank you, Jack. And in the immortal words of Charlie Kowalski, kill it, kill it, kill it.
And once again, I'm Jack Barazzini. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Stargate on StarQuest.
Anyway, I'm sorry, but that just happens to be how I feel about it. What do you think?